Well, hello, and welcome to the first official video of the Josh VanKooten Show. For those of you that didn't watch my intro video, just a reminder, this show is going to really focus on the social, legal, political, and economic issues that revolve around sports, revolve around the relationship between owners and players, media and players, as well as kind of the look at some of the future events that could really impact sports moving forward. Every video will be a little bit different. Probably won't be too many of the same sport. NFL is probably what I'm going to be focusing on the most, just because I know the most about it. But there's a lot of other sports with super interesting issues. My goal on this channel is to provide you with some, at least topics that you're not going to see on ESPN, you're not going to read on Bleacher Report or The Athletic, as well as kind of give you a completely different opinion than from journalists and career media members who are being paid by big corporations, and then also in turn being paid by the owners and the leagues themselves. So just really want to be able to give you some new insights and some new ideas to issues that I think are super important moving forward. So I thought it was only fitting, as my first video being an NFL related video, that I wear my Cam Newton jersey. I'm going to try to go through as many jerseys as I can during these videos, but if you have any old jerseys you don't wear anymore and want to send them to me, I will always take some extra jerseys. So I'd kind of I've spent a few months really thinking about starting this type of show, thinking about kind of what do I want to accomplish with it. And then there was also quite a bit of procrastination in there as well. Wanting to do production videos and things on your own for me, not the easiest. Always easier when I have somebody else helping me. So did drag my feet a little bit. But that's really nothing you need to care about. So the first video that I really wanted to focus on, I kind of wasn't sure exactly what topic. Gambling's been a big thing. Fan experience has been a big thing in sports recently. And then the NFL draft came. And the NFL draft is one of the 10 biggest sporting events in America each year. It's a spectacle. It's one of the highlights of the NFL, one of their five biggest events of the year. Really kind of a testament to what sports can be in society, as the NFL has created a event that is one of its most watched each year. That's not even a game, it's a draft. The draft itself is really impressive. And what I really wanted to kind of, as I was watching the draft and thinking about, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, all these top draft picks who have been, either fairly or unfairly put in situations where they may succeed or may not succeed. I really have been thinking a lot about the relationships of players and teams, relationships of players and owners, players and media, especially when it comes to their contracts and their ability to get fair labor and fair pay for what their services provide. So before I really hop into the two topics I want to focus on today, one thing that you should note: this is not going to be a discussion about how players use their money, about terrible contracts players have signed in terms of like okay, the Russell Wilson contract. It's one of the worst trades and contracts ever done by a team. I'm not going to talk about that sort of contract because Russell Wilson ended off far better than the value he provided to the Broncos. I'm not going to deal with the Albert Hainsworth contract, anything like that, where it's player related. The Aaron Hernandez stuff and the contract situation behind that, not going to talk about that. Today I am strictly going to be speaking about the draft and then free agency and the franchise tag, which these are two things, well, three things if you want to count the franchise tag as its own thing, which you may want to after this video. But I think those three things, as I've thought about it, are really where the laborers in the NFL are the most screwed over by the companies. We'll call teams companies today. We'll call GMs and owners managers. And so I think in terms of labor in sports, players who enter the draft and enter free agency are already a step behind. So before we hop into kind of my opinions on the draft and free agency, I wanted to give you kind of a rundown of what the NFL players' contract situation looks like throughout their career. I'm not talking about sixth, seventh round picks who were in the league for 2 years, maybe played 2 or 3 games. We're talking about serviceable players who, whether they're superstars or not, spend 5+ years in the league. So kind of think about whatever team you follow. There's probably been a player that either signed in free agency or was drafted that's maybe not your superstar, but has been on the team for quite a few years. So think about that player. So let's kind of take a look at the life cycle of their contracts in the NFL. The first thing that happens is one of three things can be happen. You are either a first round draft pick, you're a draft pick in the second through sixth rounds, or you're an undrafted free agent. So, what happens in each of those scenarios? First round draft picks, so the first through 32 draft picks, sometimes those are taken away. Falcons, you're probably not going to have one next year for the tampering issue, but usually there's 32 picks for the 32 teams. And if you are drafted in the first round, you are on a 4-year contract that has a 5th-year team option. So what the team can do is if you played really well through your 4 years, but they're not necessarily sold on signing you to a long-term deal, they have a 5th-year option they can pick up, and you're under contract on the same rookie deal for your 5th year. That's for the first round draft picks. If you're a second round through 6th round or 7th round draft pick, you are on a 4-year contract and you can begin to negotiate your secondary contract at the end of your 3rd year, which is actually technically true for the first round draft picks as well. I did just want to highlight the importance of that 5th-year team option that is held over the first round draft picks' heads. So those are your initial and undrafted rookies, undrafted free agents. They typically sign. They can sign a year. They can sign multiple years. But really, most undrafted free agents are going to get a camp contract to go to training camp and potentially have a shot to make the official opening day roster. So that's initially what happens when you come into the league. Those are the 3 ways in there. We do have some rare situations, such as like Kurt Warner, who came out of the Arena Football League. But there's really not any legitimate secondary football leagues where players come out of. I know the USFL or UFL, which is the combination of the XFL and the USFL. They've really worked hard to kind of turn that into a minor league. But for all intents and purposes, the NCAA and college football is the minor league, and players enter the league via one of those 3 routes from the NCAA. So that's what it looks like when you come into the league as a player. Now, once you get to the end of your first rookie deal, so typically big contracts will be signed. The best players typically get signed at the end of their 3rd year, which is the official period in which you can start negotiating your second deal with the team. So a lot of players get into their 3rd season. At the end of the 3rd year, they'll sign a huge contract. We're looking at currently looking at Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, who's a CD Lamb. Those are all guys who just finished their 3rd season and they're eligible for that huge contract. What's going to happen with those? Not going to talk about that here, but that's kind of where they're at right now. So let's say you play through your 5th year team option deal. So let's say a quarterback who, took the team to the playoffs once or twice, kind of like a Baker Mayfield type. Hard competitor, not going to blow you away with the stat sheets, but they're putting you in a position to win and maybe taking you to the playoffs once or twice. Not deep runs, but at least you're there. That type of player, he's going to have his 5th year option picked up. So now he's under contract with this team for 5 total years without being able to get to that generational lifetime contract. What this team's going to do for this 5th year player, if he plays well, let's say he kind of keeps the same level of consistency, maybe they're above 500 team, 3,000 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, something like that. What they're going to do is they're probably not going to say, well, you didn't convince us that you deserve a long-term deal, so we're going to franchise tag you. The franchise tag, which is one of the most insidious things in employer and labor relations, is a 1-year deal, which is the average of the top 5 players paid at that position over the last 5 years. So for a quarterback, you're probably taking a look at, I don't have the number right off the top of my head, which I should, but your quarterback, you're looking at 30 mil. Well, 30 mil is a huge increase over your rookie deal. Typically, if you're a first, top 10 pick, you're maybe making $10 to $15 million a year. So 1 year, the franchise tag doesn't sound that bad, but think about it, it's 1 year. So if this player, QBA, plays really well on his first franchise tag, well, guess what? He doesn't necessarily get his generational contract yet. He could potentially be placed on a second franchise tag. Insane. So players could get that franchise tag back. Now, the cost of getting the cost for a team of going to a second franchise tag is pretty astronomical. So it'd be a huge increase, but it's still a 1-year commitment. That's what we really need to know. So you're taking a look at a top quarterback who's maybe not an elite Burrow, Mahomes, Herbert level, but kind of that second tier where you're getting to the playoffs, you're above 500, all those sorts of things. Well, you deserve a long-term contract that sets your family up for the future. You are not going to be eligible for that under the guise of the way the NFL pay is structured until your 8th year in the league. So you think about like Bo Nix with the Broncos, who is 24, and I believe he'll be 24 for most of his rookie year. I don't know his birth date off the top of my head, but think about that. So he will be 25 in his second season, 26, 27, 28. So if they pick up two franchise tags, Bo Nix is not looking at his generational contract, which a lot of players will consider that second contract you sign, until he's in his 30s. So Bo Nix, who chose to stay a little bit longer in college, good for him, and made NIL money, good for him. He's not looking at getting a contract with the big multiple years, big, AAV, the average annual value. He's not looking at that until 7 years down the road. So I think in terms of one of my biggest issues is just the way it's structured for rookies coming into the league, and the fact that your ability to get that generational contract could be pushed multiple years down the road through the franchise tag. So that essentially is what the lifespan of an NFL player's contracts look like. Your rookie contract, potentially franchise tagged, and then your second, and then maybe your third contract. So for some players, such as like Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, I'm naming quarterbacks, but you're looking at like Justin Jefferson's going to get signed this year. Who just signed the bag? Amon-Ra St. Brown just signed his second contract. Typically after your third year, when that window of being able to sign your second contract opens, a lot of players are going to get that multiple year, multiple $1 million contract. But that is, we're talking about the top 5% of players, top 10% maybe of players are going to get that second contract. Now, what my biggest grievance is though, to start, we're going to look at the draft. So one of my biggest issues with the NFL draft is it's one of the most anti-worker things we do in this country. So think about it. So Caleb Williams, great example. He was the number one pick of the draft class this year. No matter what you think about him, he was the best quarterback in the draft, most likely to have the best success in the NFL, I would say. You want to debate about that? Email me offline. We can talk about it. But for the purposes of this video, Caleb Williams, let's talk about him. So what Caleb Williams did is he got drafted number one overall by the Chicago Bears. Here is what his contract looks like. He's getting 4 years at 39.5 million total. So looking at a little bit under $10 million a year with a 25.5 signing bonus, which is going to be spread out over 4 years. That's his guaranteed money. So what the issue is here, though, is Caleb Williams' number one pick, gets a great contract, but what if the Tennessee Titans, the 8th pick or 7th pick in the draft, who had no chance of signing Caleb Williams, what if they want to offer him more money to incentivize him to go somewhere else? You're not able to do that unless you leverage your whole franchise's future by trading up. And then again, Caleb Williams could still may not want to play for Tennessee. So what I really don't like about the draft is that we are now limiting the best athletes, so the best employees coming out of, college, don't have any option or say over their career choices. So, how many quarterbacks do we see that are great in college, have really good traits that can make them successful in the NFL, but they don't end up in a situation where they develop well, they have terrible coaches, terrible ownership, and the player just kind of fades into, forgotten history. That happens way too often because the draft is fully controlled by the employers and the employee has no ability to say where they want to go to work. There's situations like Lamar Jackson's not the best. He came to my mind, but he's not the best example because Baltimore's a great fit for him. But think about somebody like Lamar Jackson that has a very unique skill set. Some teams wanted to have him play wide receiver or running back coming out of school. The Ravens ended up being a great fit for him. But think about someone like him if he was more of like a true number one overall. He was drafted 32nd his year. But think about if he was a more of a number one overall potential guy. Well, what if he wanted to sign with the Ravens, who were a great fit for him, but the Ravens aren't picking until pick 25. There's no chance the Ravens get them. There's no chance Lamar can go into a situation where he's really comfortable. And so he could end up at, Houston or somewhere that's not going to be a great fit for his play style. They're going to have coaches that try to make him play a way that he's not able to. And then by the time he tries to get to that second contract, which is the big generational one, he has no leverage because he hasn't performed well on the field. So that is my big issue with the draft, is that we are actually, one, preventing players from developing to their full potential, and two, giving these players no ability to have any influence over where they want to go. There's only two really good examples of players having some influence and potentially a third coming up, but you take a look at John Elway and you take a look at Eli Manning. So Eli Manning, I'm a little bit more familiar with. I was 9 years old, still remember the draft in my mind. But Eli Manning did not want to go to the San Diego Chargers, who had the #1 pick on the board. His dad, Archie, and Eli felt like it was a really bad place for his development. They didn't like the coaches. And Archie, who was a former NFL quarterback, Eli's dad, used his leverage and his power to kind of force a trade between San Diego and New York. But typically, if you don't have a famous, dad or somebody who has influence in the NFL, Eli Manning, you're going and you're starting for the Chargers, whether you like it or not. And really, the opportunity of potentially sitting out a year is not worth it for, a couple millions of dollars. So, you're being put in a bad position through the draft, and oftentimes you're not able to end up where you want to go. So there's so many other things I want to say about the draft, and I'll probably do a follow-up video to this because there's many other things like players falling in the draft for bullshit reasons, players who just fall because people don't think they're good fits for their team. I think there's a lot more to be said about the draft and its um, restriction of employee rights is the best way to say it. But for the sake of this video and the time of this video, the next thing I really wanted to take a look at was free agency in the franchise tag. So we already talked about the franchise tag, to a good sense, and I think, hopefully you kind of understand what it is. It's really, it's really a direct implementation of how restrictive the draft is. The franchise tag is just as restrictive. You're telling a person that their contract has ended, that should have the ability to negotiate with as many employers as they want to for their best possible contract. You're telling them, no, you have no ability to do that. You're going to be here whether you like it or not, at typically a rate that is lower than what you're going to get on the open market. So franchise tag is one thing. We don't necessarily need to go into it too much more. But the other big thing I did want to talk about is free agency. Now, with free agency, a lot of times players do end up getting what they deserve in free agency if they can make it there. So that 5-year waiting period, 4-year waiting period, usually pretty good, and you can usually get your value on the market. So we take a look at the time of this video on May 5th, 2024, the big 3 wide receivers of this free agency class have not been signed. So we still have Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and CeeDee Lamb who need contracts. T. Higgins, I'm not really putting in those big 3, but he's also up for a contract. So, with these guys, each one of them wants to set the record for the highest paid receiver, going to be somewhere in the range of probably $35-36 million a year. Those are not the contracts I have an issue with. You're setting up Justin Jefferson for his life, and Justin Jefferson, who probably will sign a 4-year contract, then again in 4 years will probably still be in his prime and be able to leverage that for even more money. So those top players who get past the franchise tag and go onto the open market, they often do get what they're worth. My issue with free agency is for, we'll kind of call them the middle class of players, or even the positions that don't have as much value. So the best example I have of this is the running back market. For any of you that follow the NFL closely, you see the NFL market and the second contract ability of these players diminishing year over year. Think about last year with Saquon Barkley. You think about last year with Josh Jacobs. Those are players that really probably should have been able to get a longer term contract, but they were franchise tagged. And in the case of Saquon and in the case of Josh Jacobs, they are on different teams this year. And quite frankly, didn't perform as well on the franchise tag as they had in past years. And so they've already kind of lowered their value through not being able to perform as well as they normally would on the franchise tag. So that's my first issue, is a position like running back where you're having a decrease in your abilities almost every year because you're the most used player on the field. You will never get the earnings that you're supposed to. There's going to be some. Derrick Henry has had some nice contracts. Saquon got a good contract with the Eagles. Christian McCaffrey has a great contract with the 49ers. But in general, at that position, teams are going to get rid of you and not re-sign you after your first contract. So players that are maybe not top 2 or 3 running backs, well, you're going to have a hard time getting a contract, and you're certainly going to have a really hard time getting a multi-year contract. And that's where my thing with free agency really comes, is we've created this artificial time period until you can get a huge contract. And then some of these positions, you're not even really as good a player as you were entering the league once you get to that contract point. Running back is the biggest one. We're seeing this happen with wide receivers now. And so with free agency, you're really limiting the ability of players to get what they deserve if they're in one of these positions that they're not an elite talent, or they're in a position where their skills are decreasing with age and decreasing rapidly. So with the other thing I really have an issue with when it comes to free agency is when players try to earn the bag for themselves. Think about what the media says. Think about, I'm sure I've said it at some point, think about what your subreddit says if you're on those. Like, a player won't take a pay cut, a player won't sign with a team. Not a team player. Unwilling, doesn't care about the game, doesn't love the game, doesn't love his teammates. It's the media all the time is always putting down athletes who try to get theirs in the market where it's a bunch of billionaires who aren't willing to shell out money. Um, and quite frankly, a lot of these teams are already putting 20 to 25% of their books into one position at quarterback. And so, they're not really as willing to shell out for these other positions. So I hope for the most part that made sense. Definitely a little bit more kind of thoughtful about the draft than free agency. Free agency is a little bit more mixed for me because there are quality contracts that athletes sign, but my issue is really how players get to that point and how the league really tries at every point to stop them from gaining those big contracts. So, kind of moving forward, I don't expect much change in these areas. The next CBA is up in the next couple of years, but I don't really think the union is really going to negotiate something that would look along the lines of this. But if I was in the NFL Players Association, here is what I'm looking at doing. When it comes to the draft, you have to allow players to go where they want to go. Now, in on the other hand, yes, you do have to have parity amongst the teams. You have to be able to say, like, hey, you were the worst team. You do deserve a chance at the best players. But here's what I would do to resolve this situation. Now, you're taking away one of the biggest events, one of the biggest money-making events for the NFL, so the draft's never going to go away. But, if I'm a commissioner and in the perfect world, here's what I'm doing. I'm going to say there is a set amount of money that NFL teams get to pay rookies based, and it increases the worse your team record is. So we'll say not the Bears this year because they traded for the first pick from Carolina, but you take a look at the Panthers. Okay, they were 3-14. Yeah, 3-14. They should have the largest pool of rookie wage money of any team. And it decreases down to the Chiefs, who just won the Super Bowl and maybe just need one or two pieces to be able to compete. So what that would do is that would allow Carolina to say, hey, we got a quarterback last year with Bryce Young. We really need an offensive tackle who we're probably not going to get because who technically they would not be able to get this year because they didn't have a first round draft pick. But in this draft model, or this model of player signing, what they'd be able to do is say, hey, we're going to put our money in the offensive line. That's what we need. That's where our money should go. And so, they can overpay an offensive lineman. I don't want to say overpay, but they can give an offensive lineman more money because that's an area of focus rather than waiting for one to fall down to them at the 60th pick where they're not going to get really paid any money at all. And then you take a look at another team like the Chiefs, who just won the Super Bowl, and they need one or two wide receivers to complete, the team. Well, hey, if they want to go out and pitch Michael Harrison Jr. or Marvin Harrison Jr. They want to say, hey, $15 million a year for 3 years. Boom, come play for the team. You can win a Super Bowl, learn from the best. That's a great way to go about it. So I think, a true wage cap scale based on how the team finishes would really be a big way to go about creating a little bit more consistency for rookies in terms of their pay, really creating a little bit more consistency for entry-level players to get to that next contract so that they can putting themselves in positions where they can be successful. So I think something with like kind of a flex cap for rookies would be a great idea. In terms of free agency, the one thing I really think about is the franchise tag there's no reason for its existence. It is solely to benefit the owners. As my favorite quote says, it's 32 billionaires who run the league like socialists. So the franchise cap or franchise tag doesn't need to exist at all. What I would do in free agency, though, is how do you value a running back who had 3 really good years, 1,000-yard rusher, maybe 10 touchdowns, the team got to the playoffs, but by that 4th year, they're kind of declining. That 5th year, their production has gone down quite a bit. What do we do for positions like that? That's going to start happening with wide receivers. That's going to start happening, obviously, with the offense and defensive linemen. Well, I think in terms of like a running back, what you got to say is there is a percent of your salary cap that must be spent on a running back. It can be combined with your rookie wages. It can be combined with, previous running backs that you have, giving them an increase. But say, hey, there's a certain amount of money that has to go to running backs to make sure this, area of people who are putting their bodies on the line the most in the game are getting compensated with the contracts they deserve. Now, I know that that's a little bit more, could cause a little bit more issues than like the entry, the draft, the rookie cap might. But I do think just being able to give those players a safety net where it says, hey, you put your body and your life on the line for 18 years to get to this point. You can't get that big contract because this team had you do 300 touches a game or 300 touches a year. Your body's worn out by the time you're 25, and you just can't get that big contract. We have to be able to compensate those players somehow because, as we know, the NFL's post-retirement, support of players is not great. So these players need to be able to have it while they're playing the game. So in summary, I know a lot of this was a little bit of ranting, but I do really think, if you could take away anything from this video, the NFL draft is one of the most anti-worker things, and drafts in any sports really are one of the most anti-worker things imaginable. You're telling the most talented people they have no ability to choose where they live or where they work. So that's a big one. And then in terms of contracts, the franchise tag is, I don't want to go as far as saying it's insidious, but it's definitely one of the biggest restrictors of labor in the world. Free labor, or fair labor, I should say, in the world. And then free agency needs to be a little bit more evaluated on the long-term health of the players. I think a running back should not make $7,500 or $750,000 for 3 years and then be out of the league, even though they put up 500 plus rushing yards 3 years in a row. Like that is somebody that $750,000 a year is not a lot when you're thinking about the course of a lifetime and a player's potential like earning abilities post career. So we really need to kind of figure out ways that we can create safety nets for players post playing, find ways that we can be able to say reward players for being successful all the way through their life up until they get to the NFL. We've kind of been brainwashed and propagandized that being drafted is the greatest thing that can happen to you, no matter where it is, no matter what spot it is. No, you have more rights than that as a worker. And so, kind of last note, I will say one thing that I don't know if I hope it happens, but one thing that I think would be really, really interesting for those of you who follow boxing or MMA, Saudi Arabia has something called the Saudi Wealth Fund. Basically, they use this money of seemingly endless amount of money on sports washing, which is using big sporting events to cover up humanitarian crimes. But the Saudi Wealth Fund is doing is investing in other countries' sports. They bought some teams in the English Premier League, tennis tournaments, other things like that. They're supporting. What would be really interesting is if they bought, say, the UFL or they restarted the XFL or something like that, and they said, "Hey, Caleb Williams, when you come to the XFL, we'll pay you 25 mil a year for 4 years to join our league." That the Saudi Wealth Fund has that money. They could do it. What would happen at that point? I know legally, I don't really know, like from an antitrust standpoint and from a monopoly standpoint, I'm sure, the league would lose its mind and probably win in court. But just think about that possibility. What would happen if an outside organization came in, purchased an alternative football league, and was able to pay players way more than the NFL does on rookie contracts? That's the last thing I want to leave you with, but that is something that I think about way too much because it would be really interesting. Well, I hope you learned a little bit from this video. I'm going to try to put out one every Monday if possible. It'll be a lot of different topics, so it won't be NFL every week, won't be pay issues every week, but this was just really kind of the first one I wanted to talk about. Well, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to put this on podcast apps as well once I get to that point, so if you do want to listen to it with audio, you can do that. But until then, I'll see you on the other side. Bye.